In the last video, I introduced the concept of stored pricing. And so in this video, we're going to take a little bit deeper dive into that. Previously, I stored the pricing for the vendors that I had identified within this quote group. Each one of these vendors I have pricing for, so I decided to store that pricing. And again, that would be based on an understanding from the vendor that this pricing is valid, say through a given date. So where I would find that stored pricing would be under the database tab, and I would go to the pricing editor. So when I click that, that opens up the pricing information database. And by the way, to close this window, I just click that same option and that closes it as well. But I'll open it, and so I have stored pricing displayed here. The cells in yellow are things that I can edit and change on say a per vendor basis or per pricing basis. And this is where I would see the pricing that's been stored. So a few elements to this to be aware of is pricing is stored right now by phase code and item number. And that's sort of the unique identifier for each type of item that we want stored pricing for. And if I look down this tree here, I can see that the pricing is organized by phase code and by item as I just described. So if I filter it based on, again, phase and item code, I can see that I have 3 vendors that have given me pricing for that specific item under that phase code. So the tree allows me to just kind of filter that list like we've seen before. I can also change the view to look at this by vendor as well, so I can see all the pricing for Morrison Concrete together, all the pricing for Porter, Rodriguez, etc. So that allows me to more easily work on a per vendor basis if I wanted to look at it like that. Okay, so that's just different ways of viewing the data. As I mentioned, the pricing is stored by phase code and item number. So there's a standard set of phase codes and item numbers as well. And that standard set of phase codes and item numbers gets built automatically when we store pricing. And I can also view and edit that over here under phases and items. So these are all the standard phases and items that have been automatically created, and of course I can add my own right here as well. So I can identify the parent phase and the phase code and description and add that, and I can add as many as I like through that user interface. Likewise, I can add items in the same manner, identifying the parent phase, the item number description, the category, default unit of measure, and so forth. Okay, so that's simply the standards, and again, the standard phases and items get built automatically just by storing pricing, but you can also edit that yourself. Okay, so standard pricing again stored pricing can be added just by storing it from the quote, but I can also click up here under add pricing and fill out this form identifying the phase code that the pricing is associated with, its item number, and who the vendor is. The vendor's part number is optional, the vendor's own description is optional, unit price, unit measure, effective date, and through date. A note about the effective date and through date is that these fields are optional. If you leave them blank, then the assumption is that this pricing is always valid until we change it. So no date criteria will be applied to it. If I put in an effective date with no through date, then that's indicating that starting that date, this pricing is valid forever and until I may change it. And likewise, the same thing works the opposite direction. If the effective date is blank and the through date is filled in, then the pricing is valid up through that date, and then after that, it would be hopefully another pricing record or nothing, and if there's nothing, then there's no price. So this allows you to use those dates as you see fit. And like we had discussed earlier, when applying pricing, buyout is going to use the date that you specify as the effective date, and it's going to find a price that fits one of these date ranges, and use that. In no case will BIO allow you to have multiple pricing records for the same vendor, same item, where the dates overlap. So it is some business logic that's included in there. So again, if you leave these kind of open-ended, you're creating an opportunity where you could have overlapping pricing and it won't let you save that record then. So using the effective date and through date is a good general practice, just because we know that pricing truly is not valid forever, and so it's better to store those dates and utilize that functionality. You can certainly edit and delete pricing just with those options right there. I'm not sure I talked before about how pricing gets applied, but basically applying stored pricing occurs in two places in the software. One is when you're importing from the estimate. If we have the option marked in the BIO application settings where we said to automatically generate quotes based on stored pricing, that's one way stored pricing gets applied. The other way that stored pricing gets applied is when we explicitly right-click on a quote and say apply stored pricing. And what's going to happen in either of those cases is it's going to look for pricing based on a matching phase code and item number. In this case, it's going to look for pricing for Morrison Concrete for this phase code and item number, and for the unit of measure, which has to match, and where the effective date falls within a date range that we have pricing for from that vendor. So the point being that you could have pricing from a vendor with different units of measure, and it needs to, when applying the pricing, it's going to look for the particular unit of measure on that quote. So the point being that unit of measure matters, and we can't be applying a price, say, for something that's priced per unit if the unit of measure is per dozen or something like that. So the unit of measure has to match, as well as the phase code, item number, and vendor ID. Alright, so that is how stored pricing works, and that concludes this video.